Welcome. I'm Marna Davis. I'm co-chair of the Fibrolamellar Cancer Foundation, and I am Tucker's mother. And our son Tucker died of fibrolamellar in 2010 at the age of 28 after an 18-month battle. He and his friends started the Fibrolamellar Cancer Foundation, and a handful of us have continued it. This afternoon, my husband Chuck and I were looking over the bios that you all sent in. Thank you very much. And reading your remarkable backgrounds. And it's a wow. And my husband sees a lot of wow. And he was just like, oh my gosh, look at where these people have been. Look what they've done. So look what we have all done together in 14 years since this foundation was started. Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the next couple of days to see what is brought to the table. And I feel really good about where we are and more importantly, where we're going. We got a lot of good stuff to work with. I'm a parent. You know, the fear and suffering that fibrolamellar patients and their families have with this disease is just staggering. So know that when they meet you in your labs, that you give them hope. They see the work that you're doing for them for a very difficult cancer. And, you know, it always gives me pause when I'm able to attend one of those sessions where our foundation comes to the lab and some of the patients join us. And I see you and your staff meeting the patients who have the disease that they're working on. It's just, it gives me pause. It's really an incredible bonding time. So we started doing that right before the pandemic, and hopefully we'll be able to continue afterwards. Now, there's a lot of new faces here. Please, over the next 2 days, come and introduce yourself to me. And it's great to see a lot of old friends here too. Thank you for coming back all these years. But I know many of you have heard this before, but I think it always bears repeating that one day, I know, Sandy, you've heard this a lot. One day on the way to a chemo treatment, Tucker said to me, Mom, I know there's a cure out there and I hope we find it in my lifetime, but if we don't, you and Dad have to find it. And I said, we will. So here we all are. We're all working on it together. Thank you for helping us keep our promise to Tucker. So here we are. Where are we? We're at the 5th International Gathering of Researchers and Clinicians for Fibrolamellar. Yes. Oh my gosh. Great. It's really great. And, you know, way back when in the beginning, we made a crucial decision, the board, to find the best and the brightest people at home and abroad to study fibrolamellar. There was, I tell you, Dr. Keynote and I were just talking, 14 years ago was like the dark ages in fibrolamellar research. There was very, very little going on. And it would have been a whole lot easier to fund one place. But we thought maybe with not much research, we should go around and find it, you know, and have people work together and maybe we can get there faster. So hopefully that's what's happening. That's what we're doing. I thought it would be a lot easier. It's not easy, but we're all doing it together, and hopefully we will get there. We appreciate all of you sharing your knowledge with one another, because I really do think that's going to speed us towards the cure. I know you don't use the word cure, but I use the word cure. Okay. You know, but remember that we are holding this meeting under confidential disclosure agreements to encourage the sharing of information. Okay. It's really important to be able to do this year after year, that we do honor those agreements. I've also heard that no one's going to get by Lynn and Megan unless they've signed that document. So Dr. Katie, you got to sign that document. They have it for you. And this year we're research only. Every other year we're going to do patient research gatherings. And, you know, we were very fortunate recipients of a Chan Zuckerberg Award for rare diseases. And they really push patient involvement in all aspects of what we do. So they really got us going. So next year it will be a patient researcher conference. So anyway, I know I'm not really the person you're all here to listen to, and we have a really good schedule for the next day and a half. But let me tell you, starting off tonight, we have three wonderful people speaking. We have Ethan Neumann, a fibrolamellar patient and a research technician at McBrayer Lab at UTSW Children's Research Institute in Dallas. Did I get that right, Ethan? There you go. And he's currently deciding on where to go to get his PhD. So I bet a lot of people will want to talk to you tonight. And he really wants to study fibrolamellar going forward. So welcome, Ethan, and thank you for offering to talk to me. Almost. Now we also, Razelle Kurzrock. I haven't met her. Where is she? Oh, hi. Well, hello. Nice to see you. You probably all know Ray. She's an experienced clinician who's been extremely active in the treatment of rare diseases and a member of our scientific advisory board. And read about Ray's bio in our bios. It's lengthy and incredible. And finally, we have Dr. Dan Short, medical MD and PhD specializing in endocrinology, having studied at University of Iowa and doing his residence at the Mayo Clinic. Please read his bio. That's another good bio, my goodness. And his son, Benjamin, who we all know was diagnosed 5 years ago with fibrolamellar. So thank you for being here. And Dan and Ethan are both on our grant review board, and they provide a very important caregiver patient perspective to our review process. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. And here's Ethan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ethan. As you heard, I'm a FLC patient, and I've been navigating this disease since January of 2021. I'm also beginning my research career. As stated, I've worked for the past 2 years as a research technician, UT Southwestern Medical Center, looking at altered metabolism and how that initiates brain tumors. And actually, this August, I'll be pursuing my PhD at Johns Hopkins University. And today, I just want to talk about my experience with this disease and the patient's perspective on FLC research specifically. Since diagnosis, I've had 2 surgeries, multiple systemic therapies, including chemo and immunotherapy, radiation, and was part of a clinical trial as well. Dealing with this disease has been challenging for sure. Being told you have an ultra rare cancer at 22 means you have to adjust your perspective on a lot of things. First, I had to allow my mind to even perceive the diagnosis to be true. No one really thinks they'll have cancer as a young adult. And furthermore, most of our minds deem it impossible, not in the conscious sense. I knew it was possible, but unconsciously, I thought it could never happen. Even though I worried as a kid, I was a worrier. I worried about being diagnosed with many diseases. I just felt that I knew it could never happen. The mental load of dealing with so much uncertainty can be very draining for sure. We all have uncertainties in life, but uncertainties about your own lifespan can be the heaviest of them all, especially at a young age. It instills immense pressure on me to contribute greatly to the community and the people that I encounter. But sometimes the deep sense of unfairness surrounding the disease overrides my desire to make an impact. Countless times I've been at concerts, at school, gatherings. I've stood amongst my peers and thought, why me? Why am I burdened with this? Why are they not? What's the purpose? That's probably the biggest question I struggle with. The reason for this diagnosis, what's the meaning of it? And really, how can I make it meaningful? It can be viewed as a gift or a curse that I was diagnosed just after graduating with a degree in biology, already wanting to do biomedical research. At points, I felt forced into a responsibility of making meaning out of FLC by contributing to our understanding of it. But most of the time, to be honest, I felt fortunate that I was already on the path to doing research before my diagnosis. And that diagnosis really just narrowed my focus to cancer and instilled a deep sense of meaning in the work I do every day. This meaning, coupled with a positive outlook and discipline, has given me the greatest opportunity to fight this disease. And to add on top of that, the current state of research in FLC, I think, makes the future very bright. While we continue to pursue basic science, I can't wait to see the application of all the things we've learned so far. I think for all patients, this cannot come soon enough. Despite the challenges dealing with the disease, it's felt surprisingly natural for me. I've never once felt like I have cancer. I work long hours in the lab, strain under heavy weights at the gym, and run until my lungs burn. Physically, I feel energized and capable, which has helped me the most deal with FLC. I hope all the physical effort I output truly fights this cancer. Funny enough, I like to imagine that the physical strain I put myself under, puts a metabolic demand on other tissues and away from the cancer. Maybe I'm actually fighting it in a way. I feel prepared for this disease, and whatever has prepared me well. Moving forward, I see a way to beat FLC, and I think it comes from science. My perspective on research is one that is young and naive. I only have 2 years plus undergrad, but I see a clear path forward. As researchers, I think first and foremost, we all want to be right and not wrong. And we want as much evidence and as diverse of evidence that what we show to be true is actually true. And even more, we want that truth to be impactful, especially in medicine. And if we want a truthful impact, I think it's important to balance high standards and taking chances due to the rarity of FLC. Most of all, though, we need to be rigorous. Since no one person or lab can do it all, this rigor necessitates collaboration. It calls for a transparent community that draws on the expertise of the best among us. And in the end, this need to collaborate leads to serendipity in science, conversations that would not otherwise occur, and perspectives that would not otherwise be applied in the novel way that your colleague does apply that perspective. The road ends in serendipity, and serendipity is discovery. So please be open to ideas and data of those around you, and be proactive in including people of diverse expertise in your research endeavors. And the FCF has been led example on this by including me as a patient in their grant review process. So let's be right, not wrong, to be impactful. Let's be rigorous, collaborative, serendipitous, and field discovery. So much progress has already been made, and I'm excited to see it applied for the benefit of patients. So let's follow the science and the data to make the treatment of FLC trivial.
Hi there. I'm going to try and share my screen, and hopefully that will work. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say it's really a pleasure to be part of the Fibrolamellar Cancer Foundation advisory board and to speak to you. I have a long-standing interest in rare cancers and been quite involved in research in a variety of rare cancers. And I think that there are some models of how we do research, really basically melding together the clinic and the laboratory bench that are potentially very relevant to fibrolamellar cancer. So these are my disclosures. And this is just briefly my experience. I'm currently at MCW. My prior experience was last 10 years, I was at University of California, San Diego, where I did a lot of different things, but the thing that was really close to my heart was the Center for Personalized Cancer Therapy. And before that, I was at MD Anderson Cancer Center, really did my fellowship there, grew through the ranks, became a department chair, and founded and led what really became the largest clinical trials department, probably across the world, doing early phase trials. And these two experiences these two different institutions in clinical trials and precision medicine have really been the foundation about my thinking about rare cancers and really all cancers at this point. I think what is happening in cancer research is almost breathtaking. The field is moving very fast, and we literally have tools that we could not imagine even a decade ago. So one of our very important tools is molecular tools, genomics, and getting input from multiple disciplines. We had a molecular tumor board at UCSD, and altogether we did clinical grade next generation sequencing of one type or another on about 21,000 patients. And so that gave us really a lot of experience with how to use that information. And so these are going to be my take-home points. It's all about getting the right drugs to the right patient at the right time and really thinking about cancer a little bit differently than what we've been doing in the past. So the first thing that we're learning is that at the multi-omic level, every metastatic tumor is unique and complicated. Every tumor, they may have things in common, but they're different from each other. And that means that we really need to customize or individualize combination therapies to best suit individual patients. The pillars of precision medicine are genomics and immunotherapy, and people think that they're separate, but they're really a couple and they're married to each other. Now, interestingly, immunotherapy is often best suited for genomically complicated tumors. Gene-targeted therapy often suited for more simple tumors, but it's not that clear cut. And one of the great models is chronic myelogenous leukemia, which, like fibrolamellar cancer, has a fundamental fusion. In the case of CML, it's the BCR-ABL fusion. And really, CML went from being essentially a death sentence in about 3 or 4 years, a universal death sentence, and to patients now having probably what is a normal life expectancy simply by understanding the disease well. So to get the right drugs to the right patient at the right time, we really need universal genomic testing because in the end, the genomics or the molecular testing is the diagnosis, and it tells us really what underlies what is driving the cancer in any individual patient. So rare and ultra rare cancers, you all know the definition of them. There's about almost 200 types of rare cancer. And although individually rare, by definition, when you take all the rare cancers together, they form about 22% of the cancer burden. So there's really a lot of rare cancers out there. There are challenges for rare tumors. Rare tumors are more often seen in younger patients, just like FLC. Rare tumors often have poorer clinical outcome when compared to common cancers. And I think that's because they're not researched as well as common cancers. So there's often a lack of a standard treatment approach. There may be a lack of clinical trials, and there's really a lack of clinics dedicated to rare tumors. So when I was at UCSD, I formed a rare cancer clinic. And now that I'm at MCW, we've initiated a precision medicine and rare cancer clinic. And the idea is to bridge the bedside and the bench and back. So not just from the lab to the clinic, but also from the clinic to the lab, cross-fertilization. And this includes everything from immunotherapy, genomics, clinical trials, and so forth. And so what do we do in this clinic? Well, the first thing we do is we look under the microscope in a classic sense to make a diagnosis. But then we also do comprehensive molecular profiling, and that includes next generation DNA sequencing, both on tissue and blood, looking at RNA, looking at the transcriptome, looking at protein analysis, looking at immunomics signatures. And then we have a master protocol so that basically just about every patient that walks in the door that wants therapy can get on an innovative therapy. As you all probably know, clinical trials are generally very limited. They have a lot of eligibility criteria. We have a master protocol, which basically is an umbrella for everybody. And it's really a way to both get information from the laboratory to the clinic to the laboratory, and to actually treat patients in innovative ways. So I'm going to give you an example of a cancer that's different than fibrolamellar cancer, but I hope will illustrate some of the thinking. So pancreatic cancer, not kind of miserable disease. The 2-year survival for advanced pancreatic cancer patients about 7%. So about 93% of patients are dead at 2 years. So not a good disease. Almost all patients are diagnosed in an advanced state. And there's a lot of conventional wisdoms about pancreatic cancer. And I want to say that I sort of like to overturn conventional wisdoms. So here are some of the conventional wisdoms. Immunotherapy is not effective in pancreatic cancer. Targeted therapy, matching gene targeted therapy is ineffective in pancreatic cancer, and precision medicine doesn't work in pancreatic cancer. This is conventional wisdom. But when we started to look at the last few years, clinical trials, .gov, we downloaded the clinical trials, and we found that only about 10% of pancreatic cancer trials are biomarker driven. So we asked, how do we know, how does everybody know that biomarkers, molecular tests don't work in pancreatic cancer if they're not even trying, if 90% of the clinical trials don't even try, or as my father taught me, you can't win the race if you don't enter it. So we started looking at our patients, and this is the story of pancreatic cancer and matched immunotherapy, and looking at patients as individuals and subsets of disease. So we had noticed that rare chromatin remodeling gene alterations may predict response to immunotherapy. And so we looked at a series of patients that had these chromatin, patients with advanced metastatic pancreatic cancer who had these chromatin remodeling gene abnormalities. So this is a subset looking at patients as individuals. And what we found was that all the conventional wisdom was actually not correct. If you had pancreatic cancer and you had these gene alterations, you responded to immunotherapy. So 8 out of 9 patients, or 89%, achieved an objective response, including complete remissions. The 2 longest responses are ongoing at about 3 years. So this began to teach us something else as well that I want to mention. That is that the pillars of precision personalized medicine, to me, are genomics and immunotherapy. And although the people and investigators think of them as 2 separate fields, they're actually a couple, and they're married to each other. And what I mean by that is exactly what I showed you in the pancreatic cancer field. It was genomic alterations, specific genomic alterations, that predicted response to immunotherapy. So then let's go on and think a little bit more. What if every patient with metastatic disease is different? Kind of like snowflakes. Every snowflake has a complex crystal structure, and every snowflake is distinct from every other snowflake. And I'll just give you an example in breast cancer. So this is next generation sequencing a bunch of breast cancer patients. And this is an example of 2 of the patients. And what you can see is that they both have something called ERB2 amplification. But then they have coexisting alterations. And that suggests to us that even though they have something in common, most of their portfolio is different. So maybe they should get a drug in common, but their actual regimen, each patient needs a different regimen. And so this spoke to how we're redesigning cancer clinical trials. And I'm going to give you a few examples to speak to that. For instance, lung cancer was originally one disease, and now we know there's a lot of different subsets of disease. The other thing that we began to look at is molecular drivers. And we now know that you can have the same molecular driver in multiple different diseases, and you can target it in different diseases. And that has moved us from a time where we were relying on large randomized trials where only a small number of patients would respond. And you really needed a statistician to be able to see the difference between the arms, to very small trials in the modern age where we pick the patients carefully and give them a matched therapy and really have much higher response rates. So we started to redesign clinical trials, and this is N of 1 multi-omics-based personalization of therapy. So we went from a situation where the drugs were the center of the universe, and then we would find patients that fit on those drugs, to a new type of trial where the patient is the center of the universe. And what we want to do is we want to learn everything about that patient, the immune environment of their tumor, the molecular environment of their tumor, and then we fit the drugs to the patient. We don't fit the patient to the drugs, we put the drugs to the patient, because the patient is the center of the universe. So this means moving from a drug-centric to patient-centric strategy, and really testing the strategy, not really a particular drug or drug regimen. And the strategy is customized drug regimen based on what is wrong with that patient. So again, drug-centric trial, traditional, everybody gets the same therapy, whether it's based on the type of cancer or the type of molecular immune marker that they have. Moving to patient-centric trial, which means that we interrogate the patient's tumor and the host in depth. We understand the molecular environment, we understand the immune environment, and then we try to customize the therapy to that patient. So this led us to a new type of clinical trial design, and that's, again, customization N of 1 therapy. And what we realized is that with many cancers, we're playing what we call a whack-a-mole game. We give one therapy because we know something is wrong with the tumor, and we match that something, and the tumor, and then resistance mutations that have been there in the past or newly emerged pop up. Then we try to give another therapy to whack another mole, but the patient moves from one therapy to the other, and we're just not getting to where we want to be. So what we really think we need to do for a lot of these diseases is look at it like the mythical 9-headed Hydra. And if you cut off one head, 2 heads grow back, and that would be an analogy to resistance. And if you really want to kill the Hydra, which is analogy to cancer, you have to cut off all the heads. So 2 major strategies that we've been using in these clinic trials is, one is the genomic strategy. Try to treat the disease earlier when it's not as complicated. Attack the drivers such as fusions, and fusions like the DNA JB1 PRK ACA are very strong drivers, and then hit all the drivers, the fusions and any co-drivers all at once. And the second strategy is an immunotherapy strategy, and that entails activating the immune system to killing the tumor, and especially precision immunotherapy, know how the tumor has exploited the immune system. In other words, for the tumor to exist, in many cases, it has to put the immune system to sleep. And that's why immunotherapy works, because it wakes up the immune system. But precision immunotherapy means that we look at precisely what trick is the immune system using to put the tumor to sleep. The tumor has more than one way to put the immune system to sleep. And we have to interrogate the tumor to understand in any individual what is the mechanism that that tumor is using to inactivate the immune system. So we started a trial called I Predict, which is an N of 1 approach. This was activated in 2015 at UCSD. The idea was customize combinations and treat early. To my knowledge, it's really the first N of 1 trial. We treated a variety of patients. They all went through molecular profiling. We discussed them in a molecular tumor board, and then we gave them a customized therapy. And these were patients with very lethal cancers like pancreatic cancers and that refractory cancers. And what you can see is that the response rates were dramatically higher in the patients that were well matched to those that were poorly matched. And the survival was also dramatically and statistically significantly better in the well-matched patients, where over 60% were alive at 2 years and doing well. And in the poorly matched patients, less than 20% were alive and doing well in 2 years. This was published in Nature Medicine. And what we found is that there was a linear relationship between the degree of how well we matched an individual patient to the combination of drugs that we gave and how well they did. The trial was featured in National Geographic, The Future of Medicine, and in the NIH Director's Blog. And we've now opened up a very similar trial, actually expanding on what we learned at MCW. So the first trial, the technology is moving at such an incredible speed. So the first trial was based on genomics, next generation sequencing, which had really erupted on the scene and gave us powerful tools we could barely imagine. But there is so much more than genomics that is important to the tumors: transcriptomics, proteomics, epigenetic changes, metabolomics, and especially important, immunomics. And so I think one of the next frontiers, very important, that was previously unexplored, is transcriptomics, or the RNA. So that using that is really new. The technology has now improved. And why is transcriptomics important? First of all, we need to identify gene fusions. And we've seen a couple of patients that had diagnosis of fibrolamellar cancer, but where the RNA wasn't looked at well enough, they did not have they were not read as having the DNA JB1 PRKACA fusion. But then when we sent it to a different vendor and we said, we think this is FLC, then they found the fusion. So really you have to have good technologies and many other reasons for using RNA. But two other reasons that I'm going to point out is synthetic lethality, is using the RNA to figure out how to kill that tumor, and also expression of immune markers to understand how is the tumor manipulating the immune environment to deactivate the immune system. I've been working with the Worldwide Innovative Network for Personalized Cancer Therapy, whose goal is the delivery of precision medicine. I think we've done the first trial that included both genomics and transcriptomics. This was an international trial and was called Winter. And we published that in Nature Medicine. It was done in 5 different countries: France, Canada, Israel, Spain, and USA. Really gave us an opportunity to learn that the transcriptomics, the RNA, was very important, and that we should not just be looking at genomics, but we should also be considering transcriptomics. I want to finalize by talking a little bit about some of the things that we're doing with, for instance, fibrolamellar cancer. So we know that DNA JB1 PRKACA is a driver fusion, not yet druggable. So we've been trying to exploit multi-omics to understand what is going on in the ture and to explore synthetic lethality. And what I'm going to show you is a specific patient where the patient's transcriptome was analyzed, and what came out of that data, that bioinformatic data. So we recently published this. It's a case report, but I think it's very interesting in multiple ways. So this patient had advanced fibrolamellar cancer, young woman in her 30s. She was negative for every classic marker for immunotherapy. She had a low tumor mutational burden. Usually patients respond to immunotherapy if they have a high tumor mutational burden. She was PD-L1 negative by immunohistochemistry. Usually patients need to be immunohistochemistry positive. She had the undruggable DNA JB1 PRKACA fusion, and very importantly, she had already failed an anti-PD-L1 agent. So that's an immunotherapy. She had failed it. Her tumor had failed to respond to atezolizumab. And so, but the bioinformatics on the RNA suggested that she might respond to a different immunotherapy. And that's what I'm talking about, understanding each patient's tumor. So instead of an anti-PD-L1, it was suggested to use an anti-PD-1, which is a very similar drug, and some people think they're the same, but we know that they're not exactly the same. And so the drug was nivolumab, and to use a second immunotherapy with that, an anti-CTLA-4 called ipilimumab. So this was a completely non-intuitive suggestion based on the RNA. And this patient, these are one of her scans before and after, and you can see the tumors have disappeared. And she is now 2 years ongoing in complete remission. There's videos of her on the internet, so I'm not interfering with her privacy in any way. Oncology, the shape of the future. I think some of the most important things that we need to pay attention to is N of 1, individualizing patient therapy. We need to think about not just precision genomics, but precision immunotherapy. Almost a lot of the immunotherapy field, there's so many drugs in immunotherapy that are now in clinical trials, but they're not given to patients based on biomarkers for the most part. They're just given to patients without learning the lessons of precision genomics, where we began to understand that we have to pick the right patient for the right drug. And we have to be able to understand which patient needs which immunotherapy. We need to be using omics, genomics has been the first to erupt on the scene, but the transcriptome RNA is very important. The immunome is very important. Proteomics is very important. And ultimately, getting help from machine learning and AI to better understand individual patients' tumors and what might be the best match for any patient. So I'm going to wrap up and say thanks to all the precision medicine teams we've worked with, and especially to the patients. And I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for Ray? If not, we'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here. I'm Daniel Short, and my wife Jennifer and I are the caretakers of Benjamin Short, our son, who's now 26. Oh, sorry, 24. I gave him a couple of years there. So seems older than he is. So August 2017, we were dropping Benjamin off to University of Wisconsin-Madison. He'd been accepted to a very competitive program, biomedical engineering. It's a very smart kid. Looks like it's trying to do it's trying to do the use timings. Sorry about that. Well, technology, gotta love it. Okay. Yeah, exactly. We've all had those moments, right? So, Benjamin is very smart and good sense of humor. It's very much like me in a lot of respects. We can finish each other's thoughts. I always refer to him as mini me, and sometimes he objects. But he was excited to get going on his studies, and very excited here. This is Benjamin and my wife Jennifer and I and his younger sister Eliana, and just dropped him off and was really excited to see how his progress went. So in November of that year, so kind of getting towards the end of his first semester, Ben called me and said, "Hey, Dad, I had this belly ache, kind of on the right side there. It's kind of lower right side, and I'm a doctor, so I've got an MD, I got a PhD." And I said, "Oh, it sounds like it might be appendicitis. Why don't you get into the urgent care?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's what I was going to do." I said, "Okay, thanks. Yeah, I bless that idea." So he went in, and they did a CT scan and ruled out appendicitis. Turned out to just be a belly ache, but they said, "Hey, you got this thing in your liver and it better be checked out when you get home." So okay. So he told me that, and I said, "Okay, we'll set you up with one of my colleagues in gastroenterology, Mike Henry, have you see him over winter break." And I wasn't too worried because my wife Jennifer has a little benign collection of blood vessels in her liver, hemangioma. Her dad had the same thing. And at an age at that point, 18, the last thing you think about is something serious when you're talking about things in the liver in a kid. So he came home and we got him to see Mike Henry, and Mike said, "Okay, well, this is a softball sized thing. It looks benign, but given the size, we better do an MRI." So we did the MRI. He said, "Well, it still kind of looks benign, but there's really rare, ultra rare cancer that kids his age get. And we better make sure, so let's do a liver biopsy." It's okay. So now we're getting towards the end of the winter break, and I'm out to breakfast with Benjamin at the local Perkins the day before we're supposed to take him back to start his second semester. And I get a phone call from clinic on a Saturday morning. Okay. So I picked it up, and it's Mike. And he said, "Dan, so this is not good." He said, "Benjamin has cancer. He has a rare cancer called fibrolamellar cancer, and he needs treatment urgently." And the word cancer froze in my ear and slowly percolated into my brain. I was paralyzed and unable to speak, which those who know me know is kind of unheard of. But yeah, Mark knows. But I could not think, I could not speak. I just had cancer sitting there trying to make from the ear into the brain. It's kind of like getting whacked in the back of your head by a 2x4. I was in pain and stunned, and finally got out, okay, what do we do? And he said, well, we got to get him to the liver surgeon. We have, a good one here. I said, yeah, I know. I referred him all the time, Travis Smith, for various things. He said, I'll get you in next week. Okay. And he and I discussed this with Ben. And while he was talking to Ben, while Mike was talking to Ben, I looked up quickly on my cell phone about fibrolamellar cancer. There wasn't a lot. I looked up the 5-year mortality, which was bad, very bad. And so I was like getting hit again. And at that moment, I would have gladly taken a knife to my heart if I could have taken this away from my child. But I was not given that option. So at that moment that I heard it, yeah, kind of had that, but everything kind of faded to black. Instead of taking him back the next day to Madison to start his second semester, we took him back to withdraw him from classes and from his dorm and get him back to see the surgeon. So we met with the surgeon, and he's a great liver surgeon. He said, look, I've operated before on fibrolamellar when I was in training. He said, I haven't seen it since I've been in practice. But he said, I feel very confident in doing this operation, but if you want a second opinion, I can set it up someplace. But I said, I know as a physician, time is of the essence at this point. You didn't know how far it had spread, if at all. And so I said, let's get this done now. And Ben was in agreement. And so the next week he was going into surgery. So afterwards, we met with our oncologist. We had the report back from pathology, which said softball-sized tumor, about 10 centimeters, what I was trying to say there. And a lymph node was microscopically affected, which made this stage 4 cancer and per textbook incurable, which was another blow. And so we talked to the oncologist, and she said, look, there's nothing that we can see on scans anymore. By the way, I forgot to mention about the surgery. So that was planned as a 5 to 8 hour surgery. We were there, given updates every 2 hours. It went on to 5 hours, went on to 8 hours, went on to 10 hours, went on to 12 hours. The lights were turned off in the surgical waiting area. Every other patient was out of there. And finally, after 14 hours, the surgeon came out and said, look, I think I got everything. I had to chase it up the bile ducts. We had to remove his entire bile system and 3/4 of his liver. He said if I needed to remove any more, he'd needed a liver transplant, but thankfully he did not. He said, I think I got everything that we could get. I think I got everything that was there that I could find. He had to anastomose the intestine onto the liver because there's no bile system left. So, but thankfully Ben recovered well. His liver function returned to entirely normal. So like I said, we met with the oncologist, and she said, I don't know exactly what we're treating at this point, but it is stage 4. We have our options of doing nothing, doing incredibly aggressive old style chemotherapy. It's pretty toxic. We could use oral sorafenib. So that's seemed to be the kind of middle ground. That's what we did. And he did well without evidence of disease for another year. But just as in January of 2017, we'd found the diagnosis, in January of 2018, he had a recurrence, a sizable lymph node behind his heart in the mediastinum, and to match it, a couple of probable recurrences in his remaining liver. So we talked to our liver surgeon, who said, I got nothing. We do wedge resections for this. If I do a wedge resection, this is deep. He has no liver left. He'd need a liver transplant, and he's got cancer. He's not a candidate for that. And we talked to the thoracic surgeon who said, well, we can pick out the metastasis behind the heart. That's really not a problem. But if you don't do anything about the liver, what's the point? And so I looked up, and so it was sent to tumor board over University of Wisconsin-Madison at that time. They suggested Ben go on hospice. They had nothing to offer. Nothing better than hearing that your college-age child should go home and die, right? So I looked up everything I could possibly look up in terms of fibrolamellar, who was doing research, who was doing medical, and I came up blank. Fortunately, my wife took a different tack. Instead of searching the medical literature, she found the Fibrolamellar Foundation website and the patient advocacy and support group. And one of the families reached out and said, I think I know who you need to see. You need to get over to Rush and see Dr. Kent, who's here, which I'm thankful for, and see Dr. Hurdle and Sade, who are surgeons who we think can help you out. So off we went over to Rush, and thankfully we're able to get help. And they described an operation Hurdle and Sade did. They said, well, we're going to go tunnel into his liver, grab out the mets, and then we're going to go through the diaphragm and pull out the metastasis from behind his heart. And I'm sitting here, I know what they're talking about. I'm like, God, you're going to have your brown pants on that day. Said, you really think you could do that? Yeah, we think we can do that. We've done that before. Okay, not really any options. So there we went. He had a rough recovery, but he made it through surgery. Not 14 hours worth at that point. It was closer to about 6, 7. And rocky recovery, but he made it through. And then Dr. Kent afterwards started up what most of us in the field now know as triple therapy, which is nivolumab as immunotherapy, interferon, and 5-FU infusion. Since then, he's had recurrences. He's required radiation therapy twice for different meds that have come up, nano knife therapy once, and has had several changes to his not the immunotherapy, but to the chemotherapy and targeted therapy regimens. And we're thankful for that care, and it provided hope where really there was no hope previously. So being a caregiver, sometimes being a caregiver is all fun and games. This is Disney, Ben's favorite place. And he and his sister, after completing what I think was orbit-breaking speeds on the teacup, sometimes it's not fun and games. Being a caregiver is always having some degree of anxiety and fear about any number of things. Scanxiety is what most patients are and families are familiar with, which is every 3 months, you get more and more anxious as the scans approach, praying that nothing bad is found, or at least if something is found, that something can be done about it. And then the cycle repeats every 3 months, forever. Fear of death from the disease, fear of disability from the disease, for your child, obviously. Fear of side effects from the treatment, fear of making the wrong choice. Now, Ben's part of the decision maker here, but as the parents were advising, and you always hope that you're not advising incorrectly. Frustration with the emotional, cognitive, physical effects of the disease and treatment, and that's both from our perspective and from the patient's perspective, from Ben's perspective. A sense of helplessness. This disease is there and there is nothing you can do about it. You're supposed to be the protector of your child as the parent. And I can't protect him completely from this. And exhaustion from the fear, stress that happens with this. Now, on the other hand, the other side of the caregiver equation is that you get to be there to support your child, to love them, and to assist them in every way possible. And that is a gift. I wish it did not have to be for this, but it is a gift to be there for your child. I look at the disease, cancer, from two perspectives. The MD in me knows that we need to treat the disease the best we can with the tools we have available. If you don't have a screwdriver and all you have is a chisel, you make the chisel work as a screwdriver. That's our job as a physician. The PhD side of me says you figure out how to make the gosh darn screwdriver, right? That's what research is all about. The only way to make it out alive for our patients, for our children, is research. There is no other way. As we said on The Martian, you need to science your way out of this. We need more research, better, faster, focused research. I sit on the Fibrolamellar Grant Foundation as a community reviewer and making sure that there is some clinical endpoint to the research that is coming through. When you're treating cancer, there's a long game, and particularly this sort of cancer, there's a long game versus the short game. Short game is to use the tools you have to stay alive until the long game comes into play. The long game is to find a cure or a good treatment. You take the example of HIV, you at least get to a stalemate, a draw would be okay, but hopefully a cure. The clock is ticking. Every year, people are dying. People we know are dying with this disease. Research is the only solution. I would encourage you to work well and to work fast. And I thank you for your work.
I'd like to thank Ethan, Ray, and Dan for sharing their perspectives with us this evening. I think Dan said it well, really laid out a challenge. We're hoping that the next day and a half will be a real productive, collaborative exercise amongst everyone in this group. So people are dying, research is the solution. Let's go make it happen. Thank you.